Spooky season, Halloween season is finally upon us, and I want to welcome all of you guys to my first of the very many Halloween themed and horror reviews I'll be doing over the course of this October. If you guys have been following the channel for quite some time, then you know that I'm always covering horror here on the channel, so the only thing that's different here is that we're in October. But one thing I wanted to challenge myself to do, and we're going to start today, is covering all of the Halloween films that I have not yet covered here on the channel, so let's get into this. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. We're taking a trip back to 1982 for a film that's written and directed by Tommy Lee Wallace and stars people like Tom Atkins, Stacey Nelkin, Dan O'Hurley, Nancy Keys, and many more. So in the nearly 5 years that I've been here on YouTube talking about movies, I have very sporadically reviewed the Halloween franchise all over the place. I reviewed originally the first two Rob Zombie films completely just out of order right out of the gate. Then I did cover the original two Halloween films as well as the most recent 3 Halloween films. And 3 out of all those films I just mentioned are all named Halloween. But today we're going to be talking about Halloween 3 Season of the Witch as we continue on the series, as I want to continue reviewing the rest of the Michael Myers films that I have yet to cover. And this is an interesting one because there's no Michael Myers. If you're unfamiliar with this film in the franchise, Halloween 3 Season of the Witch was meant to be the beginning of an anthology series for this franchise. The first 2 films focus, of course, on the character of Michael Myers as the killer, and he dies at the end of that second film. Except instead of resurrecting him as they typically do in the slasher films, they decided that they wanted to move away from him and start having individual films that would be part of the Halloween franchise but be their own individual Halloween stories that are completely disconnected from one another. And outside of a moment where somebody's watching a TV and sees a commercial for Halloween with Michael Myers has zero presence in this film at all. Now, this was a really bold and interesting decision for the studio back then because, of course, they didn't know how big of a name Michael Myers was going to be for Halloween as a theme, as a holiday, and just as an iconic horror character. When you look at the various iconic horror slashers, Michael Myers, Ghostface, Chucky, Freddy Krueger, Jason, these characters are completely ingrained in history at this point, and it's crazy to think all the way even back then with those first 2 films being a success that the studio didn't think that Michael Myers could continue on in the same way. But Michael Myers was definitely one of the first slasher films and one of the most notable first masked slashers, so I can understand why they were maybe thinking, let's do something a little bit different. But whoa, did it backfire on them, because when this movie came out, there was not a good reception to it. And of course, as we know, all these years later, Michael Myers has returned in many more sequels because this film just kind of stands on its own as that one time they decided to try to make the franchise an anthology series, and it just did not work out. Now the question is, on its own, is it a good movie? Is it a good Halloween themed movie? Is it a good horror movie on its own? And my personal opinion is no. But what I will say is that I found this to be a wildly entertaining film. I used to watch the Halloween films and all the other slasher films that I've covered here on the channel when I was a kid, when they were on TV, when I would catch them at somebody's house on demand, or just as part of the horror marathons that they would do in the month of October over the course of my life growing up. And so going back and rewatching this movie for the first time in easily over 15 years, it was super nostalgic. I hadn't seen this movie in quite some time. I remembered the base premise. I knew what the overarching story was. But when it came down to the characters and the dialogue, the small moments, yeah, there was a lot about this film that I absolutely had forgotten about. And going back and revisiting it, I can just genuinely say that while I find this film to be not good, It is a classic, it's so bad it's good movie for me. I found it to be just tons of fun to watch. I was having a laugh throughout the entirety of the movie. I actually showed it to my fiance. It was her first ever time watching the movie, and the two of us were just cracking up the entire time, whether it be from the dialogue, the performances, the lack of character logic throughout, or some of the most ridiculous and just stupid moments of special effects. And there are some things I want to praise in here because I am a huge fan of 80s horror, and I've talked about that here on the channel on dozens and dozens of occasions. And so when it comes to things like some of the cheesy music at times that John Carpenter was still involved in, as well as that old school cinematography, and some of the old school 80s horror special effects, there was a lot to be enjoyed here as a fan of that era of filmmaking, especially for this genre. But honestly, when it comes down to the characters, when it comes down to the story, when it comes down to just dialogue, this movie for me was a mess. So without further ado, let's get into what this movie is all about. If you've never seen it before, I am going to talk a little bit openly about it, but quite frankly, this movie is just too funny not to just fully talk about. So the movie opens and we see there's a man running from some individuals that are rather stoic, some men that are all dressed in just suit and ties, and something seems off about them. This man ends up collapsing and another man ends up taking him to the hospital, which is where we meet our main doctor, Dr. Dan, played by Tom Atkins. And in this whole situation, the man who collapsed had a Halloween mask with him, specifically a Halloween mask that was part of a big corporation that's been putting all of these different ads on TV, counting down to the day of Halloween and inviting all the kids to go and get their mask and sit in front of the TV to watch this special that this company is going to do as soon as Halloween hits. And so the three masks individually that they're promoting are a witch mask, a jack-o'-lantern mask, as well as a skull mask. And so over the course of the film, we see this advert on TV over and over and over again, playing a rather annoying yet catchy jingle that is, pushing kids to go get one of those three masks that has a big symbol of the corporation right behind it and sit in front of the TV as soon as their special is going to air. We end up learning as the movie progresses that this corporation has intentions to kill the children, and when they sit in front of the TV with those masks on, it's going to melt their minds, it's going to completely just dissolve who they are and kill them right on the spot. We also learn that those very weird stoic individuals that are walking around in suit and ties are actually androids of some sort of robot that this company has created as well. And so this movie right out of the gate has a very on-the-nose message about corporations targeting children, whether it be with food, whether it be with toys, whether it be with movies. I think we all know in this world that corporations are very well known for having a bit of a wicked approach to targeting children with their advertisements. There are elements that are meant to look cool that are not good for kids, that are easily part of the world of advertising. And when you go back to the 80s and the 90s and before that even, you definitely had a lot of that going on. So I do enjoy that this film has interesting commentary on the real world while adding this Halloween spin to it. But that is the base premise, is that you have this corporation trying to get all these kids to get this mask on, sit in front of the TV when the special goes on, and that's just going to melt the minds of all the children across the world on Halloween Day. Meanwhile, throughout all of this, though, you have Dr. Dan, who's now kind of taking it upon himself to become a detective of sorts and try to discover what's going on at this corporation. Of course, I just told you what we end up finding out as the movie progresses, but that's basically the premise. Now, the man who collapsed earlier in the film actually ends up getting killed by one of these android suit and tie individuals, and his daughter, Ellie, who's played by Stacey Nelkin, ends up coming to the hospital, and it's Ellie and Dr. Dan that decide to team up together and go out of town to try to discover where these masks are being created and if they can stop the corporation that's been doing this and find some answers. And it's of course over the course of this that we start to discover things like these guys are robots and this corporation wants to do this and this is the bad guy here and this is the main bad guy there. And so the main bad guy in this film is Connell Cochran, who's played by Dan O'Hurley, I believe is how you pronounce his name, who I think does a good job of kind of like leaning into that cheesy, over-the-top corporate boss kind of villain in this film. For the most part, I enjoyed his performance. It wasn't necessarily great, but I think he kind of leaned into kind of just being that snivelly, kind of just like pain-in-the-ass corporate boss who just wants to have power and wants to be evil for the sake of being evil. Now, where this movie starts to get ridiculous for me is, number one, I think it's hilarious that a doctor decided to team up with this girl who's the daughter of a man who was murdered and just decide to go become detectives together. together when neither one of them have any sort of police background in any way, shape, or form. That part of it's already hilarious to me. But what's even funnier is that Dr. Dan, at the beginning of the movie, has a wife that he's already kind of neglecting. We already get the premise that he kind of just focuses on work more than he does his home life. And he's got 2 kids that already have these masks on when he first sees them. Of course, he ends up finding out later on what the danger of that mask is. But he decides to just go off out of town with this woman, Ellie, that he just met, the daughter of this man who died in his hospital, and literally just lies to his wife saying he's going to be away for a business trip, tells her that he doesn't even know what hotel he's staying at, and then he'll call her in a couple of days. And so she's understandably upset. We see that Dr. Dan decides to pat one of the nurses in the ass earlier in the film, and not long into being at that hotel with Ellie in the town that they're going to be trying to do some uncovering of what's going on, him and Ellie decide to just start getting it on. They just start boning right there. And I'm just looking at the screen. My fiance and I were just looking. And we're like, Dr. Dan is a piece of shit. This guy is without a doubt just going out there, just clapping ass cheeks left and right, lying to his wife. He's not a good guy. He's not a good husband. And it's almost laughable because the film kind of presents him as this like macho man with the mustache of the 80s that's out there just like, you know, slapping ass cheeks and cheating on his wife, as if we're supposed to like find him to be endearing and a likable guy. And ultimately, he's just a piece of shit guy who's cheating on his wife at every turn. And it's hilarious to me as well because this girl, Ellie, is distraught because her father has just been murdered and she's trying to get to the bottom of it. So this guy, Dr. Dan, ends up going on this trip with her to try to discover who it is that is responsible for the death of her father. And seconds into being there, they're just like, well, we just got in town. We know that that is the area where possibly some sketchy things are going on. But let's go back to the hotel room and take our clothes off and start having some sex first. And they literally show up with like nothing, which is hilarious. Even the guy who checks them into their hotel room says, oh, wow, you guys pack light. They had like one tiny little box. But then they go to the room and Ellie is popping out in like full on like lingerie. Like, I'm like, where did you have that packed away? Did you already know that you and Dr. Dan were going to get jiggy with it as you go to try to uncover what happened to your father and how he died? It was just kind of hilarious to me that amidst this horror movie, this Halloween tale, you have this cheating husband and this woman who just lost her father who decides to just have sex with this doctor who's a married man. It's just so silly to me. The characters and their choices just feel so dumb that it just feels like somebody wrote it without even really thinking in a lot of ways. And that's just some of the silliness of this film. There are so many moments of small dialogue over the course of this movie that were just so laughably bad to me that just literally made me have a guttural outward laugh. You know, sometimes you watch a movie and it's funny or it's kind of stupid and you might have like a quick chuckle or a little bit of like a giggle, if you will. But this movie had moments where literally we were just cracking up laughing because the line delivery would be so committed yet so terrible, and the line that they were delivering would be equally as terrible. Ultimately, Halloween 3 Season of the Witch for me is a mess of a movie with a very simple, straightforward premise that has a, solid, kind of theme about how corporations target children in their marketing and different things like that. But I am so happy that this franchise decided to not deviate further into the anthology world, though it would have been interesting to see what they would have done, and moved back to Michael Myers, as Michael Myers, without a doubt, is what makes this franchise work. But it was a lot of fun to go back and check out Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. I don't necessarily think this is a great movie, but I do recognize that this is a movie that holds a special place in many people's hearts, and I know that there are a lot of people who enjoy this film just because it is a different film within this franchise that can be rather samey when it comes to Michael Myers stabbing people left and right. So whichever camp you land in, I definitely want you to comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. Do you like this movie? Do you not like this movie? And of the 3 masks, if you would have gone and purchased one, the skull, the witch, and the jack-o'-lantern, which of the 3 would you have purchased if you had the option to pick one of those 3? Definitely want to hear what you guys have to say down below. Hit that like button, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.